Hello, hello, hello. Let's see. All right, all right. I am checking. Yes, we are all good. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Sober Witch Life podcast. I am Sunshine. I'm by myself here this week. We were hoping to have a guest on yesterday, somebody I've been long anticipating, and we ended up having a private session instead. So, my heart goes out to them, and, may they see the relief that they are seeking. Yeah. Um, so today's topic is, I don't know, I know it's the topic in the conversation that I need to be having because literally, probably about an hour ago, I met with one of our new coven members. We do an initial call when everybody joins, and they started talking about this topic without me even mentioning it. So yeah, I know this is meant for some folks to hear. So if it feels uncomfortable, if it feels strange, it feels weird, please do me a favor and keep listening because it means that there's something here that you are meant to hear. Something here you're meant to listen to. All right. Um, yeah. So this past spring, on Facebook memories, they show up and it'll tell you, like, you've got memories. I don't always click on it. I just don't. But this past spring, I did. And it was probably like, I don't know, maybe February, maybe even March. And there was a memory that just kind of like dropped my jaw that showed up. It was from 2013. So I would have been in my early 30s at that particular time. I would have been 33. And I had decided to give up alcohol for Lent. Yes, I was raised Catholic, so I'm aware of Lent. Not that I like practice a whole bunch of Catholic things, but let's be real. Like, I understand the concept of Lent or any of the other kind of fasting traditions in religion and spiritual practices. So I thought, why not? Why not give it a shot, right? 40 days without drinking. Except these memories showed me I could not wait to get through it, right? There was one post that said, Sundays aren't a part of Lent, right? Because tonight would be perfect for a glass of wine. And another one said, can't wait till Lent is over so I can put some vodka in my lemonade. Crikey. And I laughed, I was like, wow, right? Like, okay, yeah, I was certainly an alcoholic even back then. But the thing that really shocked me, or I would even say like shook me in some ways, is that I had decided to mark those private. I put those posts in private, right? So nobody else could see. Now, I could have done this at any particular time, any other year where those memories may have come up, but I don't recall it as such, right? I really don't. I wasn't outwardly like making a joke to my friends, I was recording these thoughts for myself. My guess is maybe even as a way for me to like look back on them just as I was doing, but maybe even in the way of like a year from there to see it, right? But again, it's not like I open up every memory every time, right? So here we are, more than a decade later, and I could see what I was doing at that I know what I was doing at that time, right? I was negotiating with alcohol, right? And by golly, did I start to think about a lot of things. I thought back about how during that particular time, I also remember trying to figure out what the rules were, right? Did Sundays count, right? Were there any type of exceptions? What if St. Patrick's Day fell on a Friday, which you're not typically supposed to eat meat, but yet St. Patrick, it's a saint day, and one of the celebrations is to eat corned beef, and so, well, if you can eat meat on St. Patrick's Day, well, I must be able to drink on St. Patrick's Day. I mean, God forbid not drinking on St. Patrick's Day. 40 days. That's it. That's all that I was asking for was 40 days. Just 10 days longer than a month. And that required lengthy research, negotiation, and like rulemaking. So I've been thinking a lot about moderation lately. Not whether or not it works, because I think that's a whole nother conversation, right? And I think there can be a lot more complexities to that. But I've been thinking about what happens inside of us when we begin to convince ourselves that maybe we don't really need to be in recovery. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe we've learned our lesson. Like we had one really horrific night, and so we just learned and we're never going to repeat it now, right? Maybe thinking that I needed to be in recovery was an overreaction. And this really hit home for me hard this weekend because we had someone step out of the Recovery Coven because they believe that moderation is still possible for them. And that's their story and that's their choice to make. And I will honor and respect that always. But I had to pause because I recognized this. I recognized this voice. I recognized this story because I had heard, I told myself this story many, many times before. And I can see, I've had conversations with my partner a number of times about this. Like when I look back at my old moderation attempts, it wasn't always just limiting the quantity, right? These attempts took on all sorts of different forms, right? Sometimes it was quantity, like, I'm only going to have 2 drinks. If I drink, it's only going to be 2 drinks in a night, right? Sometimes it meant frequency, like, I'm not going to drink during the week. I'm only going to drink on the weekends, and it's only going to be Friday and Saturday evening, right? Sometimes it was the type of liquor. This was always my favorite one. I'm not going to drink any dark liquor. I'm only going to drink vodka liquor. I'm never going to take it in a shot. I'm only going to do a vodka and a club soda, and once I have one of those, I will then have to switch to beer. I'm only going to have a vodka and a club soda, but I have to make sure to measure out the vodka when I put it in. I can't actually do a freehand pour. And somewhere along the lines, towards the latter part of my drinking career, I had convinced myself that I was only going to drink beer or wine. I mean, liquor was where things would get wild and crazy, right? Where the blackouts would come about. And it sounded pretty responsible, except I was drinking beer with over a 9 to 12% ABV, right? So this was like wine in a pint glass, right? And if you know about a pour of wine, I think a pour of wine is 6 ounces. A pint glass is 16 ounces. So while I may have only finished a bottle of wine in a night, I was finishing 4, 5, sometimes 6 of these beers. But because they were technically beer, I told myself that I was holding my boundary and I was in control. Right? Oh gosh, yeah. That's like the weirdest thing to me looking back at my addiction is this whole architecture of rules that I had built around something that I believed that I could control, right? There were rules, there were some exceptions to rules, right? There was what happened if I didn't, agree to the rule, or I wanted to change the rule, right? There were certain special vacation rules, like if I was on vacation, it was okay. There was, this was another one, it was all right to drink before noon on vacation, but the rest of the time I had to wait until after 5 p.m. And sometimes it was even who I would drink with, because some people, it was just really hard, right? So maybe if my partner agreed to drink less, I would drink less, right? If I became more disciplined about my drinking, everything would just fall into place. Yeah. And sometimes one of the rules would work for a week. Sometimes it would work for a couple of them, sometimes a month, right? And every successful stretch that I had became evidence for this bullshit PowerPoint presentation that my mind would just keep adding a new slide to, right? See, you can control this. Obviously, you've made it a week. You can control this. You just have to try harder. But I have this question for me now looking back. If I had so much control over my alcohol and my drinking, why did controlling alcohol require so much energy? So much energy, right? Moderation was exhausting to me. I spent all of this emotional, mental energy just figuring out how to drink responsibly. Like I was constantly negotiating with myself or planning or building a boundary, right? All around something that I supposedly didn't have a problem with. And then I would adjust those boundaries every time they became inconvenient. And this is something, as I was sitting here and, kind of writing all my notes and everything today for this, I was thinking about this. So, alcohol enters your bloodstream. And that means that the person that wrote all of those rules and boundaries, that individual, myself, that is supposed to be enforcing all of that, well, I begin to lose inhibition, right? This is why we make decisions while we're drinking that we wouldn't if we weren't, right? Sometimes those decisions are incredibly risky and dangerous, like getting behind the wheel of a car. Sometimes they're like horrifyingly embarrassing, like sending that text or photo that you regret the next morning. And sometimes they're just ridiculous, like pulling into a White Castle drive-through and ordering 5 sliders and then slamming them all down before you pass out for the night. Right? Alcohol has never been known to improve decision making. So, mind blown, right? My moderation strategy, all of those years, essentially depended on drinking alcohol and then expecting my increasingly intoxicated version of myself to remain committed to the rules the sober version of me created. Oh, geez. Yeah. I jokingly put in my article today about this, like, I'll take how to fail for 500, Alex, right? Like, come on. Like, I'm like mind blown on this, like how like counter logic this is. And I think, looking back, that our physical bodies, like our body talks to us first about this, right? We're trying to moderate, we're trying to do all these things, and our body starts screaming at us, right? Our hangovers, they become even more brutal. It's not just an hour, it's 2 hours, it's 3 hours, that headache. That headache turns into a 4-day migraine, right? We may have more blackouts, more moments within the night that we don't truly remember. Our partner, our loved one saying, like, I can't believe you said that to me last night. Or they're just not talking to you and you have no clue why. Right? And if you're watching this on video, a little hard to believe, but I had weight loss surgery in 2016, and they tell you that after surgery, you're a lot more susceptible to alcohol. And I knew the warning, I understood what it meant, but I really didn't think it would apply to me, right? Because again, I wasn't drinking hard liquor, right? Or if I was, it was just a shot, right? But these blackouts afterwards were unbelievably crazy. And Monday morning started to come around after a weekend of drinking, and I would be at work just ever so slightly sweating or shaking. Not enough that anybody else would notice, but enough that I was noticing, enough that I noticed my discomfort. And then we add on the anxiety. And I realize now that anxiety had been there for a really long time, right? I'd even talked to my doctor. Gosh, I mean, it was like, this was years before even that surgery. I talked to my doctor about getting a prescription for Xanax, right? Because I was just feeling, I would have these moments of just like overwhelming anxiety, not full blown panic attacks, but just like so anxious, just this like high voltage energy running through my body. And it often showed up on a Tuesday. And what did I usually spend Friday and Saturday at the very least doing? sometimes even in that negotiation of breaking rules, Sunday, drinking, right? Drinking. So here I was, usually on a Tuesday, maybe even a Tuesday night, unable to fall asleep because my body was trying to regulate itself after an entire weekend of what I had put it through. And then we add on like the exhaustion, the heartburn, broken promises about, eating better, just terrible sleep. And my body was always trying to tell me something wasn't working, right? But I had this extraordinary talented attorney living up in the mind saying, all of that evidence inadmissible, right? And then at some point, my spirit, I think all of us, our spirit starts talking to us, right? And even though I'd been practicing witchcraft and reading tarot and I'd been connected, but I had not been living it. It had not been involved in my day-to-day life at this particular point, right? I wasn't seeing the synchronicities. I wasn't hearing the messages. I wasn't recognizing these things clearly, right? Even at some point, now that I've been in recovery, I've realized I hardly dreamt. It was only after I gave up cannabis that dreams started coming back to me almost every single night. 2, 3, 4 dreams every single night. Versus I could go a whole year with hardly ever remembering a dream. Right? But this strongest, the most powerful, the most earth-shattering spiritual confrontation was not through a prophetic dream or a download or a synchronicity. It was because somebody I love ended up in the hospital. My cousin was a year younger than me. We'd grown up together, and I watched alcohol completely destroy his body. By the time he had entered in the hospital in July of 2018, he'd been deteriorating for months. He'd been avoiding going there, probably because he knew they were going to tell him it was the alcohol. And when I saw a picture of him, I could see someone I didn't recognize. His face was sunken in. He had lost, God, I don't even know, 40, 50 pounds. I mean, he was never, a big person as it was. He was frail. His skin was yellow with jaundice. His body was at a point that the doctors couldn't even reverse what had already happened. And I looked at him and I knew something deep within my spirit. And that was, I didn't want to die like this. Like, I didn't want my life to be over. I wanted to do something. I wanted to do something that mattered to me. And then I kept drinking. Even though I realized that, I still kept drinking. And I think sometimes we think that just because we understand the consequences, we understand what it's doing to our mind, right? I should say, to our body and to our spirit, that that's going to be enough, right? But that's not true. Sometimes we still drink. And at that point in my life, I was going through so much personally. My father had nearly died as a result of alcoholism. My cousin, he's here on his deathbed. I was overwhelmed. There was things going on with my partner at that time with his own addictions and relapsing, and just, it was a lot. I was grieving, I was traumatized, and I kept doing the thing that I knew to do to numb myself for another 5 months. Until the beginning of 2019, I finally tried to stop. I committed to 90 days without alcohol, and I almost made it. And while I can't prove the exact date with absolute certainty, I'm fairly convinced that I relapsed on the day that my cousin passed. My spirit knew where alcohol could take me long before I was willing to let that knowledge completely change my behavior. And that's because the mind plays a huge role in what we decide. And that's what I've been thinking about a lot lately. Our body can tell us, our spirit can tell us, and then that Our mind just walks into that meeting with that PowerPoint presentation and a laser pointer and explains that everything's okay, it's all fine, and we should just keep doing exactly what we've been doing. It's really not that bad. I mean, at that particular point, I was successful. I had a career, I paid all my bills, I'd never been arrested, I'd never been caught drunk driving. I wasn't like all of the alcoholics, right? I wasn't homeless, living under a bridge. I could control everything else in my life. So obviously, I could control my drinking. I just needed to do more with it, right? And one of the biggest arguments I kept telling myself was I was just never going to get that bad because I could control. I was never going to get that bad. I wasn't going to become my father. I wasn't going to become my cousin. I knew how to plan better. I knew how to achieve more. I knew how to keep things looking okay from the outside. I could outsmart this. Except addiction has an extraordinary ability to use our strengths against us. I put this one in italics, this quote, in the article that I wrote. My belief that I was a person capable of controlling everything became one of the very arguments that allowed me to continue doing something that was increasingly outside of my control. When I sit back and I have all weekend long, I've been asking why do we do this? Why do we do this? Why do we get into this place of moderation? Tell me, I'm having conversation with spirit. Tell me what this is. Paint this picture. Help me understand. Help me know this. And this very interesting thought came. What if our mind is the mouthpiece of the ego, right? When we are on the edge of any type of change, any big thing, right? The ego is not going to step in and say, whew, slow down. I am so scared right now. I don't know what's going to happen, but like, I'm just, you got to let me catch up here, right? Instead, it's really, really clever, right? It tells you things like, we can moderate. We'll just drink on vacation. It's not really a problem. It's not really a problem. I think you're old enough now that you get it and understand that if you overdo it, it's not good. So we'll just dial it back, right? And then the ego starts telling you, hey, here's all of the things that you're going to lose if you stop drinking, right? You're going to lose your friends. You're not going to have fun on vacations. Those fancy dinners out with a glass of wine, those have got to go. All of your fun. I mean, what are you going to do for fun now? Right? Aren't you going to be bored? I mean, come on now. We're too old to be lonely. Right? We're too old to have to figure all of this life stuff out. We're just going to moderate our drinking. And the thing is that fear, this ego, this conversation our ego is having with us has pieces of truth in it. Sobriety cost me things. I lost a lot of friends, a lot of friends. I lost the partner that I'd been with. I lost an identity that I had spent years, right? I had spent, I was 40 when I stepped into recovery. So 22 years of my adult life, I had spent building this identity. And I grieved a lot. I still grieve. But I think we do a disservice to people in recovery when we promise that absolutely nothing meaningful will be lost. Right? That it's just, there's going to be miracles and blessings throughout the day, right? It's a disservice. Recovery can rearrange our entire life. Some friendships are not going to be able to survive. Some relationships may need to be over. And some of your identity, yeah, you might need to say goodbye to that. But today, looking back with almost 7 years in recovery myself, 7 years since I've picked up a drink, I see those losses a lot differently. Those friendships that I was so horrified to lose were shallow. These were people that I kept pouring more and more into and never receiving the same in return. I had a partner who I loved deeply at that time, right? Who struggled to care and love for himself. And that really limited his ability to show up as a partner that I needed. And the identity that I lost, it had been built from everyone else's expectations for me. I'd created this incredibly successful corporate version of myself, this accomplished middle class person who checked all of the boxes and looked like I had everything put together. And it had served me, that identity served me for a really long time. But it was built off of expectations that were handed down to me from by my father, by society, and by a version of myself who thought I had to become something acceptable to the rest of the world rather than becoming who I was. I much prefer to be the weird, strange, crazy witch that I am now. Oh! It just feels a hell of a lot more like me. I stepped out of an abusive marriage when I was 35 and I knew I had to change something. So I thought that's what it was, getting out of that relationship, right? I didn't understand though that alcohol belonged to that life, right? That it was a part of that life that I was leaving behind. It took me another 5 years to figure that out. And that's where trauma in and of itself can make change incredibly complicated. We've spent years surviving painful circumstances, so it becomes familiar to be uncomfortable, right? It feels safe. Like we know what it's like. We know where the cliffs are, right? We know how the arguments are going to happen. We know what friends we can count on, which ones we can't count on. We know all of the suffering. It's familiar. It's like a best friend, right? And there's this strange comfort that we get knowing the devil you're dancing with because you already know the choreography. Recovery asks us to stop dancing. And when we do and we stop spinning around, we're standing somewhere we've never been. And we may have to ask ourselves questions that we've spent years avoiding. Who am I? What relationships are really good for me? What am I going to do for fun now? What do I do if I get really sad or upset? What happens if I'm feeling lonely? I think we talk constantly about the fear of failure and not enough of the fear of possibility. Because if my life could become different, then suddenly I had to find out what different meant. If you had shown old drinking me what my life today looks like, I probably would have told you it felt pretty boring. You know, one of my favorite things to do now, me and my partner will wake up, we make some coffee, we take it out into the backyards, and we just sit and we listen to the birds. It's no party, there's no outrageous story of like, oh my God, can you believe what I just did last night? There's no chaos, there's no like buzz that extends throughout everything, right? It's not like horribly impressive, except, you know, if we see a new bird like this golden finch that's been showing up on the sunflowers lately. It's just coffee and birds and maybe sometimes the bees. And it's so beautiful. That's one of the strangest gifts of recovery as your definition of aliveness, of beauty, begins to change. The life that I have now would almost have been completely impossible for me to imagine. I live in this wild, crazy colored house, right? I have all sorts of custom artwork and trinkets and memories and altars. My garden, if I were to take you outside, it extends almost throughout the entire front and backyard. And I get to travel, right? Maybe not to far off away exotic places. Um, Maybe it's just even back and forth to Chicago and Pittsburgh to visit these people that I've fallen like so deeply and madly in love with, and I could not imagine my life without them anymore. I get to teach magic. I trust in my psychic abilities so unbelievably so. I've built a spiritual community. I've become comfortable enough in my own power to help other people find their way back to themselves. And none of that was visible from where I stood when I was trying to negotiate all of these rules about alcohol and trying to moderate. And I think that may be one of fear's cruelest tricks, is because fear demands evidence of the beautiful life that before we agree to walk towards it. But we can't have evidence unless we've lived it. At some point, you have to give possibility a chance. Recently, somebody else within the coven had been struggling. Again, like I said, I've been thinking about moderation for weeks now. And they'd been moving back and forth, and they had told me, they sat down and they said, I really, 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 I can't do this. I don't want this anymore. So I turned towards something that I've been doing, for the last 7 years. Spirit, like, downloaded, like, there's a ritual here. So I wrote a ritual for them. It was a rite. And originally it didn't have a name to it. But by the time I was done reading it and I read through all of the notes that I had taken on it, it became very obvious. It was the rite of choosing a beautiful life. Not the right of giving something up, not the right of never having fun again, not the right of deprivation, but about choosing a beautiful life. Because maybe we frame recovery backward for way too long, and we spend too much time focused on what we have to give up. What can I never do again? What am I going to lose? What will I miss? Who will not understand me? Right? But what if recovery was also about asking what we're choosing? What becomes possible for us when we stop feeding the thing that hurts us? What other amazing, incredible people are out there for me to meet? What do my mornings look like when I'm peaceful and feeling good and vibrant? Where do I get to travel when I don't have to worry about whether or not I've had too much to get into a car? What gifts have yet to awaken? A beautiful life does not necessarily mean some spectacular Instagram-worthy experience. It means safety. Sometimes it means laughing without wondering what you said later. Sometimes it means waking up without shame or horror, looking at your phone. Sometimes it means coffee and birds. The question that I encourage each of you to think right now, if you are thinking about or traveling down that road of moderation, is what part of me is speaking? When we're out there trying to navigate all this, what part of me is speaking? Is my body speaking to me? Is this a fear? Is this my ego? Is this my spirit trying to talk? And then asking, what voice do I consent to follow? What do I really want to follow? We can hear all of these things. All of these things can be true at the same time. It can suck, right? We may lose friends. Yes, we can't drink again, and that's shitty. But we get to choose something else. And the voice that I have found that was always the most worth listening to was the one that was quiet. The one that was asking me to face an uncomfortable possibility. That encouraged me to set a boundary or to leave a relationship or apply for a different job, ask for help. And all of those things felt really terrifying. And I think trauma can sometimes teach us that discomfort means danger. but it's not. The familiar thing may feel safer simply because we know how it hurts. And something new could hurt too, because there's no guarantees. But something new also contains one possibility the familiar cannot offer. It might be better. Yeah, it might be better. I've thought a lot about what would happen if I could go back to that 35-year-old self that decided to leave the ex husband. And if I could tell her anything, what I would say. And I'd tell her all about my life right now and what it's like having let go of alcohol. And I think she'd start sooner. Not because everything afterward would be easy, but because she'd see how beautiful this life was. So if your body or your spirit has been trying to whisper something to you, and your mind keeps finding reasons to negotiate, you don't have to shame that voice. Just get curious about it. Ask it what it's afraid of. Ask what it thinks it's protecting. Ask why it needs so many rules and explanation and exceptions. And then ask yourself, what voice are you going to follow? Find courage. Courage is going to give the unknown a chance to surprise you. Because maybe the life on the other side of what you're afraid of, maybe the life that you can't quite picture, isn't empty. Maybe it's unbelievably beautiful and it's just waiting for you to get it. So, yeah. Much love from me to all of you.